I'd say that's step one.
Now I'll try and filter out the background noise in post, but so this is going to be my method of making what I call Dutch pancakes. Now the reason why is because even though this recipe is adapted from an American pancake recipe, so I've stayed in a lot of places. I've lived in several places, but I think there's a difference between staying somewhere and living somewhere. However, the place I think that like bridges the gap between staying somewhere and living somewhere for me was Amsterdam. I lived there for about 5 weeks, and I wanted to stay longer, but if I stayed any longer, I would have been deported. So yeah, when I was there, I was sort of introduced to pancakes in a way that's very different from what we do here in America. In America, pancakes are breakfast. That's it. There, not so much. However, this recipe is meant to duplicate pancakes you can buy pre-made in the store in a vacuum pack. My lazy ass self got to really like those. And so I've been trying to fiddle with recipes until I could replicate it, and so this is my attempt to do that. Now, you see down at the bottom, hot water to taste, hence why I turn the kettle on first thing. Now, here are the things you're going to need. You're going to need all-purpose flour, you need baking powder, not baking soda, salt, sugar, milk, 1 egg, and 3 tablespoons of melted butter. Okay, so here is the necessary / recommended hardware. You're going to need measuring cups, at least 1 1/4. You're going to need measuring spoons, at least 1 tablespoon and 1 teaspoon, if you're brave enough to eyeball. You're going to need a whisk. You are going to need, well, I really recommend it, a rubber spatula, regular spatula. And I have this tiny non-stick pan that's like so tiny. Pretty much the only thing I use it for is pancakes, because it makes one nice sized pancake. Now, recommended hardware would include this, I don't know what these are called, Pyrex measuring glass, and this tiny little sieve for powdered sugar, because powdered sugar is optional, but highly recommended.
Now, why the boiling water? Now, that's twofold in addition to the needing it for the recipe. The other one is I highly recommend you just make yourself a cup of tea or a cup of coffee. And yes, with boiling water, and I'll explain why. So, tea for me, maybe coffee for someone else, but yeah, it just adds the incentive to boil the water. And we'll get back to this, but trust me, it's a good idea. Now, I know I forgot it earlier, but I really hope it goes without saying, you need a bowl. Yeah, sorry, I was using it to carry over all the ingredients from the pantry. So what we're going to start with are the dry ingredients. Now, what are the dry ingredients? That will be the flour, the baking powder, the salt, and although technically not traditionally considered it, sugar. We're going to add it in the bowl, and then we're going to use the whisk to mix it all together, and that saves us the need of having to sift it. Okay, so my cat is trying to eat my foot right now. Anyways, so here's another reason for the tea. Now, this may sound a bit odd, or coffee, but the reason why I recommend that you start with making some coffee or some tea is because, like most people, unless maybe you're a Marine, you'll want milk in either. So the reason why you want to do that is you want the milk to warm up a little bit, so that when you add the milk and the melted butter, the cold milk doesn't, shock the butter back into being solid. So with that, and same with the egg, like get that out early so it's not super cold. So that's what we're going to do. We are going to add the milk and the egg, And then we're going to pour in the butter and very quickly start whisking it together so that it doesn't have time to shock. And yeah, and then later, once it's a little more incorporated, this is optional. I like to add just a little dash of vanilla extract, but that's just me. So yeah, let's get started. All right, so that's everything but the hot water. Now, as you might be able to tell, this is actually a pretty thick mixture. So this would probably pass as like a decent, what we call pancakes in the United States. It would be a lot thicker, a lot cakier, a lot fluffier, which personally I don't really like. They just become sponges and then they get mushy, and it's like when there's too much something wet on a sandwich and the bread goes soggy. It's not a pleasant mouthfeel. So this is where the hot water comes in, because you want this to be a slightly runny batter. So we're going to add a little at a time. That's why it's to taste, because it's a little different every time. Now, since this is hot water and a very thick batter, you don't want to start vigorously from the start, because you'll just splash water out. So both of my parents' cats are in the kitchen right now, and any second they're going to start fighting. Now you might be able to see that's a little bit thinner by how much more quickly it'll drop off the whisk. That's still a bit too thick, so we're going to add a bit more. Can you see that, how the water is splashing up against the side of the bowl? So, yeah. If you're familiar with making anything involving whipped egg whites, the lift and cut method, you can probably see it's getting a little bit thinner, dropping off much more quickly. Now this could work. It would be a little bit more on the cakey side again. I'm going to add just a little bit more, and you'll see why in a minute. See how it's really... Oh, and the cats are fighting. See how it's running off the whisk really quickly? And it's not filling any gaps. You can see right through it. It's pretty thin. Now I'm going to show you something that I call the spatula test. So we're going to clean up the sides anyways, so that's why it helps to have the rubber spatula. So when I pull the spatula out, look at so you see the dark blue rubber in the background? So here, you see how you can start to see the dark blue? That's kind of what you want. You want it to be semi-transparent, because yes, you want it that thin. Now, here is the key step. And set a timer for about 10 to 15 minutes. That is probably the main reason for the tea. Trust me. Now, for those of you more familiar with baking, you'll probably ask, well, why did I let this rest for 10-15 minutes? Doesn't have yeast in it, it has baking powder. Well, the thing is, you still want to give it time to form bubbles, because for me, the bubbles are key to any pancake. If you're more used to making American style pancakes, yes, when the bubbles start forming, that's when you know it's almost time to flip. This is something similar, however, you want many, many tiny bubbles. So, let's see how we did. Yeah, I think it looks pretty good. Now, here comes this. Now, yes, we used it to measure our milk, but I also recommend that you put half of the batter in this, and you're going to use this to pour your pancakes. So, sorry, it had water in it from when I washed out the milk. So, you can just eyeball it. Now, this recipe is 2 heaping servings of pancakes, or 2 more gentle servings across 2 days, because that's generally when I make this. I make it for myself, usually when I'm house sitting, like right now. And what I do is I put half in here, and I make my heaping pile-o pancakes. And then afterwards, I put the second half in here, wrap it up tight with saran wrap, put it in the fridge, and make some the next day. Because, yeah, we let this sit for 15 minutes, and you'll see how that works out. And I might have to make a little companion video about what it's like the next day. Because the more time you give it, the more bubbles develop. And it's just it's better. However, I wouldn't let it sit for more than like a day, because it does have rye egg in it and butter. Anyways, so yes, I also realized I forgot to add vanilla, so I will do that, and then I will add half of that in there. Alright, so small but fairly heavy bottom pan. I'd say heats at medium to medium high. You want it good and hot before you get started. So, yeah. Now, let's check the batter. Yeah, good consistency. Sometimes it can thicken up a little bit. That's pretty normal once you've let it sit for a minute, or 15 minutes. So occasionally I'll add like maybe another tablespoon of hot water, but this seems to be pretty good. Now I'll show you what I mean by bubbles are key. So as soon as I clean off this spatula. Okay. Now, here's why I recommend that you use something like this with a spout that's easy to pour. Now, I recommend that you pick up the pan just a little bit, try and center the batter, drop a good bit of it in, and then shake it and move it around. Because again, this is a very thin batter. This is not going to be a big, thick pancake. It's going to be something between a pancake and a crepe. Okay, now, you see this? You see those like bajillion little tiny bubbles? You want to let it cook until this whole top looks dry. Get under it. Flip. See, because you did the swirly and the shaky, you're going to get this fun pattern on the bottom. Now, you want to give that a minute. Now, I wish I could zoom in, except I don't know how to do that here exactly. Because these have an interesting texture, so bear with me. Now, although this is a fairly thin pancake, it's actually fairly spongy. In fact, it almost feels like a rather dense sponge cake. So, it can absorb, but it's not just gonna like fill up like a sponge. Also, I do kind of love the patterns you get. Now, why am I doing this? If we have any English viewers right now and you're familiar with what a crumpet is, I guess this is kind of similar, because what we want to do is we want to brown the other side and open up those bubbles that had formed. So, let's see if we can get a peek. Yeah, see? So we're creating a bit of a crust on top, but it's also highlighting all the little bubbles and opening them up. And those, much like the indentations on a waffle, are going to be great for holding things. So, I don't know. That's why I think Dutch pancakes are so fascinating, because they're a bit hardier than a crepe, which is very papery and thin, and yet they have the holes so that they can hold things. So if you want to make these larger and, you know, even add a bit more water to make them a bit thinner, you could turn them into something crepe-like and, you know, fill it with sauce. You know, so if you're going to make something like a, I don't know, like a chicken Florentine and then wrap it in one of these, that you have that instead of pasta. Yeah, so there we go. Now here's what I tend to do. I get some butter. For some reason, my parents, who I'm house sitting for, have this weird ultra fancy French butter in a weird shape as if it were made out of brie. And then powdered sugar. Because they may be Dutch style pancakes, but I still eat them like a gluttonous American. Now, repeat. Now, I wanted to show you, admittedly this one has butter on it, I wanted to show you all these nice little holes, these little dots. Now, this one was the last one from the picture, so that's why it's a little uneven, but I wanted to show you what it looks like when you cut into it, if I can. So, yes, I switch knife and fork. I was raised like an American. My apologies. Now, I don't know if I'll be able to get this to focus. Do you see that? Do you see how it still has some cakiness to it? You can still see the bubbles inside, how it's still springy and spongy. Well, yeah, so that's why I kind of like these pancakes more than American pancakes. They're not so thick and spongy, and you can get a little texture on them here, because, you know, like, can you hear that? Rather than where it's much softer. So that can be fun for when you're making something that isn't just, you know, butter and sugar and Vermont maple syrup. So this can be really fun when you're cooking something that, you know, like has a sauce, or you want to add like a little texture, or you just need something to contain something else. This is rather nice because it can absorb without getting mushy. And yeah, it's really easy. And although these may seem like a lot of bubbles, I think I might make a companion video for tomorrow just to show you how many more bubbles you'll get if you let it rest a day. So yeah, I'm eating this. Okay, so here we are, day 2, as demonstrated by the fact that I have sleeves and I'm drinking coffee that I accidentally poured too much milk in. Alright, pancakes. Now, I did add a little hot water just to thin the batter up just a little bit because it had hardened in the fridge. And I'm going to make y'all motion sick, but I don't know if this is something that camera's going to capture, but there's actually a little like upswing right here from where it's really thin where it meets the pan, and then where it goes up towards the center. You might be able to see it a little more back here. Ooh. See how there's a little bit of a shadow? They get a little bit fluffier. And what I mean by there's more bubbles, I don't just mean on the surface, I mean inside. So I'll cut into this and show you. Okay. Weird, we didn't get a pattern. Okay. Well, we kind of did. Maybe this is Superman's pancake. Alright, now let's see if I can get this on camera. It didn't go super well yesterday when I tried, but do you see that? See all the little tiny bubbles? But yeah, so it's even though this batter was probably thinner than it was yesterday, yeah, they're sort of fluffier. So it's gonna be really good the next day. So there you go.